Hey guys, today's video is going to be on an easy overview of verses 21 through 31 with Daniel 11 in regards to Antiochus and the Antichrist. So stick with me. All right, so I haven't recorded for about 2 weeks. We left off on a very tough video where I went in depth with verses 21 through 31, and I was giving you two views of how these verses could play out. And that was a lot of information. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to review those verses a little bit more simple. I'm going to simplify them for you. And I'm just going to zone into one way to look at these verses instead of giving you two options, just because having two options and how these verses could play out, it might just with your mind. So, friendly reminder, Daniel 11, I see it being broken apart 5 different ways. The first part would be more historic. Those are verses 1 through 20. Today, we're going to go over verses 21 through 31, where I see these verses partially being manifested by Antiochus, who was an evil man. But more of these verses, the material that we read, will manifest in the future. The third part, our next video, is going to be about a group of people called the Maccabees and how they are foreshadowing another God-fearing group of people in the future. Those will be verses 32 through 35. And then we'll end the last 2 videos with scriptures that will talk on specifically the Antichrist, his religious agenda, and then the Antichrist and his military agenda. And those will be verses 36 through 39. That's the religious agenda. And then 40 through 45, military agenda. So verse 21, here we go. 21. So it says, and in his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. How I look at this is we got that Seleucid dynasty and we have the Ptolemy dynasty. Okay, you can go out and Google and just see that, and then you have a visual. So the Seleucid dynasty, the king died, and in his place rose up Antiochus. From what I've studied, the people didn't even want Antiochus as like their leader, but he came in by intrigue. What does intrigue mean? Looked up the word. It can mean like, it said fine promises, and it said smoothness. And so to me, intrigue in this case is not good. It was like secretive, and I would even say a little bit cunning. All right, so scripture goes on. We now know Antiochus is ruling that Seleucid dynasty. The headquarters would be Syria. That would be the land of the north. So verse 22, it says, with the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. What is this? I see this as Egypt as of now, okay? So you constantly saw the north and the south fighting back and forth, okay? And so Antiochus is coming into Egypt, and he comes in like a flood, and he's going to pretty much sweep it away. He's going to gather plunder, he's going to gather towns, and he's also going to be breaking a covenant. So it appears that the king of Egypt, so with the Ptolemy dynasty, the headquarters was Egypt. And so with the king of Egypt and then Antiochus, it sounds like they had some type of bond, some type of treaty league, but it did end up breaking. And so that's verse 22 in a nutshell. Verse 23, it says, and after the league is made, that goes back to that Prince of Covenant. That's how I'm looking at, I'm just combining those two things. It says, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. So I see this as Antiochus. He was deceitful. Like I said, that covenant, that treaty, that league was broken, and he comes up with a small number of people. Let's keep on reading. I'll tie in verses 23 and 24 together. So verse 24, it says, he shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So what I see happening, and I've done some research, it seems like Antiochus in his first invasion, I read somewhere where he invaded Egypt 4 times. Then I just watched a lecture, and that professor said there was 5 times. So, a person will have to go do more research and fact check a little bit to find out the exact amount of invasions. But I'm looking at this as the first invasion that Antiochus had with Egypt. And like I said, it came in peacefully. As I did research, it looked like he took town by town and gathered plunder. And he even got into the strongest places and he overtook. So that's how I'm looking at verses 23 and 24. All right, so now verse 25, and I'll talk about the Antichrist and how I see him walking all of this out after I walk through just how I'm seeing Antiochus fulfill this. So in verse 25, this is where we're not exactly sure what dynasty won. So first invasion happened, Antiochus won, he goes back to Syria. Now there's going to be a second invasion. Now, what makes it confusing is I see verse 25 as a second invasion, where others are thinking it's the third invasion. I'm just going to stick to the second invasion. I'm going to stick with a man named Guzik, David Guzik. That's where he's standing. I'm going to side with him right now. But just know, as I'm walking through verses 25 through 29, although I'm going to state that Antiochus lost, it could have been that Antiochus actually won. It just depends on what invasion you're looking at, okay? So here we go, verse 25. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south. So this would be Antiochus. And the king of the south, remember that's Egypt, the Ptolemy dynasty, shall be stirred up to battle with a very great mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. So as of now, I'm going to say it was Antiochus that could not stand, and they devised plans against Antiochus. That's where I'm standing now, but it could be flip-flopped, okay? So just put all of this on a shelf for now. We'll all have to do our research and study more to kind of really tweak this out to see how it really did unfold in the past. All right, so verse 26, it says, yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So again, I'm looking at this as Antiochus. His own people came against him. Okay, so that's how I'm looking at it. We could indeed look at it at vice versa, and it was Egypt, and it was the Egyptians, king's servants that came against the king of Egypt. It could be. All right, we're going to keep on going. Verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So in a nutshell, these two kings, it doesn't even matter in this case who won or whatnot. This verse is just saying they were both evil. Verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his land. So I'm looking at it as Antiochus is mad because he did not win this second invasion. I'm looking at it as a second. Some may think it's the third. I see this invasion as the invasion where Rome helped and came alongside of Egypt. And so Antiochus, he is mad. He is not happy. And so he's heading back up to that Seleucid dynasty, up to Syria. He's got to pass through Jerusalem. And so he desecrates Jerusalem. Like he is going to pretty much do the abomination of desolation. We're going to see that very soon. So verse 29, I'm going to be lumping 28 and 29 together, whereas others will separate them. So I see 29 just repeating itself from verse 28. So verse 29 says, and at the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. So I still see it as a second invasion. Verse 30, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. This would be Rome. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against that holy covenant and do damage. I just see it repeating. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So again, he's mad. He lost with Egypt. Rome came in. There is a famous story where I would assume it was the commander, the head honcho of Rome, stood in front of Antiochus and drew a circle around Antiochus and pretty much said, you know, you need to tell me like what you're going to do. And if you step over this line, then pretty much you've declared war. I just remember hearing that. I might have butchered that story a little bit. It's not even a story. It's real historical. But have you heard draw a line in the sand? That came from the situation with Antiochus and Rome. So again, that head honcho of Rome drew a circle around Antiochus and said, you need to decide what you're going to do. And if you don't tell me, if you step over this line, then I know you are, you know, you've declared war. And so Antiochus went home and, you know, was mad. He was mad because he lost. So verse 31, this is the mama bear. This is the mama bear. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. This is the biggest part because Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, verse 15. The reason why I'm even reading Daniel is because of Jesus. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and then he's going to go on and he's going to say what to do when you see it. You guys, when Jesus talked on this whole situation I just talked about already happened. With Antiochus, it already happened. So Jesus, he could not have been referring to Antiochus. He had to be referring to a future abomination of desolation. He had to have been. And so when Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, and then Matthew says in parentheses, reader understand. It means we need to read Daniel and we need to try and understand what's going on. This situation with Antiochus already happened. The abomination was he took a pig, he put it on the altar, he sacrificed it to Zeus, he killed Jewish people. I mean, it was horrible, but this already happened. How could Jesus say when you see the abomination of desolation, how could he be referring to Antiochus? It already happened. There's a future abomination of desolation. So what we do is we come here to the book of Daniel and we study it. And if we know verse 31 is still future, there could be that potential of verses 21 through 30 being also for the future. Remember, prophecy at times can have a partial fulfillment, and then the greater fulfillment is still in the future. So verse 31, that still needs to happen. So there could be, like I said, those verses 21 through 30, there could be some future fulfillment there. So what we want to look for is this. So all those verses I talked on, right? And I know some of them were a little up in the air. We weren't exactly sure how they unfolded, but we did know that the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemy dynasty were back and forth, back and forth. So Middle East, we could be looking for, Syria, Iran, I would have to go I have my map. Someone asked me about my map and he said, did you really color that? And I'm like, I did. So what we could do is, here's that yellow. Yellow is that Seleucid dynasty. Okay. So, they are fighting with purple, it's Egypt over there. And so we could look for something like that in the future, okay? So we could be looking for conflict. The Antichrist very well could be coming from right here, this Seleucid dynasty. We could be looking for how the Antichrist does get defeated. Not completely, but and we're going to see it later. We're going to see it later in scripture where, you know, the Antichrist is evil. And yes, he conquers so much, but there are going to be people that are against him. And we saw that just now. We saw how he had some type of league, some type of treaty, but it broke. What does that remind you of? Daniel 9:27. Not saying it's going to be exactly the same. Antiochus came up as a smaller leader. People didn't really want him in leadership right away. Could be a characteristic of the Antichrist. So that's why we looked at verses 21 through 30, because some of that stuff could still have a future fulfillment. So with that said, I've definitely done a lot of videos on the abomination of desolation. So if you're not familiar with what the future abomination of desolation is going to look like, I'll put a video on the bottom. All right. Bye, guys.